Good morning from Washington. I'm Candy Crowley. 4 more Iraqi towns have fallen to ISIS, an Islamist militia that is plowing its way through Iraq on the way to Baghdad. This as the initial group of U.S. military advisors is expected to arrive soon in Iraq. Joining me now, Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky. A rare treat to find you in town, so thanks for being here.
Good morning.
Looking at the situation in Iraq as it is now, what would President Paul do?
I think we have to understand first how we got here, and then we have to decide as a country where we're going. I think there's chaos in the Middle East, and I think the chaos is because we've created a vacuum. Before the Iraq War, I think there was somewhat of a standoff between Sunni and Shiite, had been for maybe 1,000 years off and on. But now we have a chaotic situation, we have a vacuum. And I think one of the reasons why ISIS has been emboldened is because we've been arming their allies. We have been allied with ISIS in Syria. They have had a safe haven because we have been arming the rebels to keep Assad away from them, and now they go back and forth. So I think our intervention in Syria has led precisely to what's going on in Iraq.
It may have, Senator, but when one's sitting in the Oval Office, you have to think, what do we do now? So would President Paul at this moment send U.S. advisors and say, go and see what we can do to help the Iraqi army? Would a President Paul say, I might do airstrikes?
I think the first thing you'd have to do is follow the Constitution. The Constitution says that Congress decides. The president doesn't have the unilateral authority to begin war.
But do you think it's a good idea?
Well, here's what I would say is this is an incredibly important point.
Right.
The Reagan doctrine for how we go to war is that you should have a consensus of the people. So there needs to be a full-throated debate in Congress, and Congress has to decide. Militarily, we could go back in. You know, the surge worked. Obviously, we have the military might and power, but the country as a whole has to decide, do we want to send 100,000 troops in, or are we willing to have 4,500 young Americans die to save a city like Mosul that the Shiites won't even save, that they've fled?
What does Rand Paul think at this point?
No ground troops. I think that we need to see...
And I think most everybody agrees. How about airstrikes?
I think we need to see what the Shiites will do to defend themselves. If the Shiites are not willing to fight for their country, it may be that their country is not going to exist.
No, because by the time you hold a plebiscite and find out how people feel about Iraq, by the time you get Congress to do anything, it's 2 weeks later, and the ISIS is sitting in Baghdad.
Right.
So you're going to have to move pretty quickly here, but you're against airstrikes.
There are times when a president would move quickly to dispel an imminent threat to our country. But where I disagree with the president is his theory in Libya was that there was an imminent threat to Benghazi. That's not what an imminent threat is. It's an imminent threat to our country. And so what I would say is that the Shiites who are ripping their uniforms off and running need to stand up and fight. And could we assist them in some way? I'm not ruling that out. But I would first wait to see, are the Shiites going to fight for their country or not?
Let me play you something that one of your Republican colleagues said, Senator Marco Rubio. He was talking about why this is important, and he does believe that national security is at stake.
The reason why we care is because we cannot allow a safe haven to develop there that can be used to carry out attacks that can kill Americans, including here in our homeland.
So do you believe that the ISIS is a national security threat to the United States?
Well, do you know where the safe haven is? The safe haven's in Syria. So those who, but let me finish. Because the thing is that they would not be empowered in Iraq if we were not providing safe haven in Syria by arming their allies.
So should we go to Syria? I mean, the thing is, we kind of are where we are.
No,
so
well, we are where we are because we are where we are because we armed the Syrian rebels. We have been fighting alongside Al-Qaeda, fighting alongside ISIS. ISIS is now emboldened in 2 countries. But here's the anomaly. We're with ISIS in Syria. We're on the same side of the war. So those who want to get involved to stop ISIS in Iraq are allied with ISIS in Syria. That is the real contradiction to this whole policy.
Right. And many of your Republican colleagues would argue that what we should have done in Syria was get rid of Assad, and that would have stopped ISIS in his tracks. But
we've done this. Look at Libya. We went into Libya and we got rid of that terrible Gaddafi. Now it's a jihadist wonderland over there. There's jihadists everywhere. If we were to get rid of Assad, it would be a jihadist wonderland in Syria. It's now a jihadist wonderland in Iraq, precisely because we got over-involved, not because we had too little involvement, but too much involvement.
And here we are. Can a terrorist haven in Iraq, does a terrorist haven in Iraq, which it may be soon, threaten the national security of the U.S.? Yes or no?
Well, it could at some point. I would say right now, if you are a member of ISIS, you're looking at the Shiites right in front of you in the battles you're fighting. I don't believe that ISIS is right now in the middle of a battle saying, I think we're going to send intercontinental ballistic missiles to America. So could they be a threat? Yes. But what I would say
Shouldn't we stop them now?
Well, we should have not armed them. If we wouldn't have armed them in Syria, maybe they wouldn't be in Iraq.
Right?
Well, the past is 6 months ago. The past is still the current as well. It is the present. We are still arming the radical Islamic rebels in Syria. So the homeland, they're going back and forth across the border. They go back into Syria, and that is a homeland that we are helping to defend for them.
How do you stop that?
Well, let's not be involved in the Syrian civil war, and let's not be involved in the Iraq civil war. I think that
out altogether.
Well, no. What I would say is that Maliki is an ally. Although here's the thing: is they think they're going to create stability by pushing Maliki out in the middle of a war. So we push him out, and then we have another power vacuum, and nobody leading the country at all. What I would say is, and my prediction is, that Maliki will stand up and the Shiites will stand up, that ISIS will not be able to take Baghdad, and there will be a civil war over there, but there'll be a civil war with feckless people on one side that aren't necessarily great allies of ours, who are allies of Iran, and on the other side, allies of al-Qaeda. You have to ask yourself, are you willing to send your son? Am I willing to send my son to retake back a city, Mosul, that they weren't willing to defend themselves? I'm not willing to send my son into that mess.
Let me move you to a different subject, and that is you are working with Senator Cory Booker, a Democrat from New Jersey, on reestablishing federal voting rights to nonviolent felons who have served parole and et cetera. What of all the issues facing Congress at this point, what draws you to that? Is this about Republican inroads into minority communities?
As I've traveled about the country and within my state talking to people, I found a number of people. In fact, as I've explored the issue, there's nearly 1 million people in our country who have lost their voting rights. In Kentucky, you lose your voting rights forever. I have a friend whose brother grew marijuana plants 30 years ago in college, has a felony conviction, and still cannot vote 30 years ago. I think that's wrong and unfair. Republicans, I think, have been unfairly tarred as, trying to suppress vote. Here's a Republican who wants to enhance the vote. This is a much bigger problem than anything else limiting voting right now. Nearly 1 million people can't vote, and I want to help people get their right to vote back.
And as we know, African Americans, percentage-wise, certainly make up a larger percentage of folks being incarcerated. I think the NAACP has estimated about 1/3 of young black males are in jail. Is this a way for the Republican Party to begin outreach, which they have said for decades they needed to do, into minority communities?
Well, I think it's both. I believe in the issue, but you're right. It is opening the door for me to talk to communities. 3 out of 4 people in prison are black or brown for nonviolent drug use. However, when you do surveys, white kids are doing drugs at an equal rate, and they're a much bigger part of the population. So why are the prisons full of black and brown kids? It's easier to arrest them. It's easier to convict them. They don't get as good at attorneys. And frankly, they live in the city in a much more collected fashion than in the suburbs. And so the police are patrolling the city more. But it is unfair. The war on drugs has had a racial outcome unintentionally, but it has a racial outcome, and I want to try to fix it.
And we should say your bill, in fact, does change some drug laws in order to try to even out the punishment for similar drugs. Last question quickly, just because this brings up the whole idea of voter registration and getting people out to vote. Hillary Clinton recently proposed that there should be an automatic registering of voters once they turn 18. What do you think?
I think voting should require a little bit of effort, but I am for people voting. Registration's not as big a deal for me how we do it. In fact, I've talked with other senators about maybe online registration to make it easier, but voting needs to be in person. I don't like the concept of you don't even have to get off your couch to vote, so I am for going to the polls, but I'm also for giving people their voting rights back, and I'm for everyone voting, no matter who you are, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent. I think more the better.
Senator Rand Paul, some of your proposals coming up in the Senate this week, I understand.
Yes.
So we will be watching that closely. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Next up, Senator Dianne Feinstein has seen the intelligence on Iraq for more than a decade. She'll tell us if the U.S. dropped the ball again.